Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
That's a joke. It's gonna be filmed.
Yeah, no. See, he's laughing in the back.
I guess you will repeat the lecture.
Do you think I have to? If it's not shot, I have to do it again. Okay, so I will finish quick this part. This is important. This argument will be exactly the same for the nonlinear theorem. The point is the following. Remember, we have okay. Remember, we aim at solving this equation. Be careful, I think once in the last course I have called EF. Well, it's the same. E is usually for electric field. In general, it's the same. What we have proved so far under the stability condition, plus regularity initially for F0 and so on and so forth, we have proved that the density is going in strong sense towards its spatial average, which is invariant with time. Remember my convention, this is the spatial average. And this is in strong sense, and under our condition it's exponential rate here. From this you deduce immediately, remember that f is given by the gradient of a convolution of rho by something on which we have regularity control. So we deduce that the force F. Yeah.
You are writing in the nonlinear equation.
Oh, sorry, you're right.
No?
Okay.
Yes, you're right, sorry. Yeah. I'm still finishing the proof for the linearized equation. And so the force strongly goes to zero with also exponential rate. From this, now the natural question is what can we deduce asymptotically on h, not only rho but h? So we start again from a formula we had computed last week. So now it's the general formula for the all frequencies, not just only rho, but for all h. You remember by Duhamel along the characteristic of the free transport plus going to Fourier. Okay. So do you remember it's the full formula? And we had so far we had made computation only when eta was equal to 0. But now we can use again the full formula and remark the following. We have proved the decay on this guy. But the decay on this guy is also for free because we have assumed it. So combining these two decay, we will be able to show the convergence of this integral. So for k equal to 0, let's distinguish two cases. For k equals to 0, this whole integral is 0 because you have k here as a factor, and you obtain that the k0 mod is not depending on time, and it's equal to the initial one. This reflects the fact that the spatial average is preserved by the equation. Then now consider any non-zero k mode, and we use the two following things, the decay we have proved, the rho of h mod k time tau is less than some constant with the lambda. Now I take one lambda for all the control I have up to changing the name. Just take one lambda. I have this decay. I consider only now positive time. You could do same argument backward. And second, from the assumption I have made, I have the following decay because my F0 is analytic. So its Fourier transform decays also like this, like exponential. Okay, you agree these two decays, and then of course up to a bit of loss on the rate lambda. Lambda is something positive here. Up to losing a bit, you can ensure that first this term is controlled by this decay, okay, because you have an exponential decay here which take care of this guy, and you can take care of the k thanks to rho because you have a decay exponential in rho, and you can also well, sorry, not this k, because for zero, close to zero time it will be a problem. This k you can take care with this guy. Assume that k w hat is bounded. It's always okay in applications because we will have things which decays faster than 1 over k. And what else? So you have control this, you have control this. Then you could just forget this guy and get time integrability with this. But we want to say more. We will gather the two phases here using triangular inequality. So you use the elementary following inequality. Okay, so you see you have the phase which is here, the phase which is here. You have a minus, so you get from above, it reverses the sign, and you get that the integral term, let's call it this IT term, we get a control of this form for some lambda prime a bit less than lambda. You okay with this? I've just gathered the two phases. Up to losing a bit, you always can obtain this. And since it's also true for H initial, because H initial is analytic in the second variable, so you also have exactly the same control up to changing a bit the constant. So let's take the worst of the constant we have and call them the same. And so we end up with the following. So we obtain finally for all frequencies time our solution HT Fourier satisfies this control, where the prime is here to recall that we have lost a bit on the right. And so why I have written this, because I want you to notice that this is exactly the same as for free transport. I mean, this is one of the starting idea we had. I mean, it's not so new because it's implicit, if you want, in the computation made at the time of Landau. But for us, this was really a starting point because when we understood that more or less you can rephrase the damping as exactly the same kind of control as what we have for phase mixing. Of course, what we have lost is not anymore an explicit formula, you know, with on the right-hand side just the initial data and so on, but still we have the same control. Then this was the starting point in the sense that we understood we have to define norms which turns along these frequencies to correctly measure the system. And the goal in the nonlinear theorem will be to try to show, I already said that for free transport, but now I have shown you that same estimate hold for linear SVP, and then we will try to show that same estimates hold for the nonlinear Vlasov-Poisson equation in perturbative setting.
Tell me, it is on the Penrose condition or you?
Sure. Yeah.
So that appears in the C.
Yeah, in the C and the lambda prime, they all depend on all the constants, you know, in my lemma when I study the Volterra equation.
And the spectral gap between...
Yeah, the pole, the size of the pole, when you solve the dispersion relation, the regularity of the initial data, the regularity of the stationary state, they all enter into this concept.
It is C and lambda prime.
The lambda prime also is depending on the worth of all this rate.
Okay.
And now you can also check that for free, once you have obtained this, it also means that if you fix the frequencies, it goes to 0 as long as k different than 0. And any eta, we have h, t, the corresponding mode, which goes to 0. This means a weak convergence to the 0k mode. So for free, we have also proved here the weak convergence of the whole distribution towards the initial spatial average, which depends only on V, and this is time independent. And not something, it looks simplistic in this setting, but it will be broken later on in a nonlinear case. What we have proved is that we have a whole set of homoclinic orbits. Okay, because you could do the same, exactly same argument for t going to minus infinity, and you get the same limit. And this limit are stationary solutions of Vlasov-Poisson. This is due to the fact that linearized Vlasov-Poisson in this setting preserves the spatial average, which is not the case anymore for the nonlinear Vlasov-Poisson. Okay, so maybe now let's go to the next chapter. So let's say nonlinear Landau damping. So main result, problems and strategies. I don't have a better name, but I would like to, because since in the strategy of the paper there are a lot of steps, it's really useful to first to explain to you the strategy, the whole strategy, the global strategy. And also the motivation, which are the problems you encounter and how to solve them. So of course, let's start with the main question. Well, sorry, I have forgotten just a remark. Maybe I don't need to write it, but just a very general remark. What we have done in the last two courses is to solve a linear PDE. Integral differential PDE, there is an integration, but it's a linear PDE. To obtain this convergence, of Of course, you could prove this kind of convergence with much lower assumptions. I mean, I have made a whole machinery, and then I obtained what seems to be a very small result in terms of the whole machinery. But, and usually for studying a linear equation, you don't need to do so precise thing to look every mode and every frequencies and so on, because it's linear, so you can do many things for free. But it happens that in fact this whole study and also the spirit of this study to try to quantify this kind of phase mixing along each frequency is really needed when then you want to consider the nonlinearity and the self interactions again. And then you will have interactions between the modes and so on, and we will really need this very precise information on the asymptotic behavior. So the starting question is validity of previous stability study for the nonlinear equation. And without neglecting self-interaction, so we go back now to the full nonlinear Vlasov-Poisson equation. And I have to say, this is just something I had planned to remark, and it's connected to the discussion with Walter just before. It has been a long time open problem, a long-standing open problem to show that Penrose stability criterion, let me write it like this, implies in general nonlinear stability. There are partial results under the monotonicity condition in different settings. So you see, we have shown so far that it implies the linearized stability. It's not clear that it implies the stability for the nonlinear equation in some neighborhood. And so you have some results in the monotonous case, monotonous maybe. So remember I discussed several cases, but the monotonous case is the case without second small bump. And it has been a long-standing problem to extend this to perturbation of this extension for small bumps, secondary bumps, let's say. So it's a related problem, if you want. And just to say, our theorem provides an answer to this. Also, I have to say, modestly, it's with analytic assumptions, so it's really not the same kind of assumptions usually people do consider for proving this. They really consider low regularity spaces. But we prove this in analytic setting. So we just rely really on the Penrose stability criterion, and we can have secondary small bumps. Okay, so this is the question. Let me say a word about discussion by physicists or physico-mathematicians, but more physicists than mathematicians. Let's say objections or discussion by physicists. Sorry? Objection to this. To prove this. To prove a stability R. So maybe let me make my statement more precise. I mean, we are mathematicians. For us, big means infinite. So I want a statement for all times. This is what makes the existing results interesting and not and by far non-trivial. Of course, if you ask for a statement on a finite interval, well, it means pretty much nothing. You could make statement on large in time interval depending on the size of the perturbation. This really means something, but this is in spirit not so much different than trying to do something for all times. So this is the question, and so it was discussed by several physicists in terms of how large can be the time on which such a stability could hold. So I just quote two things, which I don't claim to understand perfectly, but I just quote them because it's interesting. There is a discussion by O'Neill where he claimed a time scale of O of 1 over square root of epsilon for nonlinear effects to really be present. For really seeing nonlinear dynamics. Before this time, he says, well, the dynamics of the linear VP and the nonlinear VP is almost the same.
Epsilon's the size of the...
Yeah, sorry, you're right. Epsilon is the size of the perturbation.
What?
Of the perturbation.
Size of the initial
Initial perturbation.
perturbation.
Sure, initially. And this discussion is based on the scaling invariance of the equation. Okay, this is based on the idea that if you have an equation, a solution F, you can define another one like this. This is my dimension. This is still my epsilon, x. Here I don't want to scale x because I want to stay in my box. And you have this scaling for the equation.
But you need the real Coulomb potential to scale, no?
Yes, you're right. It depends on the way. Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, really, you need something scaling like 1 over r for the potential. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. You're right. Yeah, yes, you're right. Coulomb on Newton, but you need the right scaling. Then you have a discussion with a quite different argument by Bacchus in 60 in JMP, Journal of Mathematical Physics. Well, this discussion is interesting in order not to forget that there will really be nonlinear effect quite soon. So Bacchus in 60 made the following observation. Start from a perturbation of a stable stationary solution. So from now on, every time I will say stable, I mean according to Penrose stability criterion. Stable in the linearized setting. So he says, well, you start with this h which is small in whatever norm you want. Some norm with regularity, whatever. And then the observation is very simple. He was not writing it exactly as I do, but now we have made a lot of computation, we can be more precise than what he wrote in his paper. He identifies two problems. This one is the second one, sorry. So he identifies problem for norm with regularity. So the argument is the following. If filamentation really hold, even in the nonlinear self-induced Blazov-Poisson, and I mean, no one doubts that it holds. You can see by numerical simulation, you can see in experiments. So you remember this filamentation means this very high oscillation as time goes on the velocity variable. So if you believe to this, he said, well, the norm of ht will grow with t, since the norm includes some regularity. And another related but even worse problem is the following. In the nonlinear term of the equation, this term, usually you expect that if the linearized study can help to predict the asymptotic, you expect to show that the nonlinear term of our equation will remain small for all time. Here, the argument of Bacchus, as I said a bit already, is to say that this should grow because of filamentation. So in the nonlinear term, so take it for h, this should grow with linear growth in time. And we can be a bit more precise from what we have done before. Remember, assume that H is a solution to free transport. If you believe to the free transport comparison, but this is really what happens in fact, then you look at the Fourier at time t in the frequency k and eta, and you remember it's given exactly by the following solution: 2i pi eta h tilde initial k eta plus kt. And so the argument is very simple, it's the following. Also we have some decay on h initial. For eta being close to minus kt, it will be of order 1. And so we expect that we will be able to prove that we replace eta by this value, some constant time kt. If you take the modulus, sorry. So this is a kind of heuristic argument to tell you that you have a phenomenon here of, in French we say bosse glissante. François, do you know how to say this? Gliding bump. The typical phenomena we teach to students to explain the weak convergence. We have this typical phenomena here. And so if you adjust correctly your frequencies, you can get something of order 1. And you can cook up an example where this will really be of order 1 at this point, and so you get some bound from below by this heuristic, which is growing with time. You see, you just replace eta by this. This is just a heuristic argument, but really telling you that you have to pay a price for this gradient in V. And so Bacchus was raising concerns about possibility of extending the Landau argument to a nonlinear setting. Remember that, moreover, Landau computation is really based on analyticity. These problems just get worse if you go to analytic space.
What did you say you meant by regular norms?
Well, any norms which include regularity in V. Any norms including gradient in V or higher. Anything which includes the control of the derivative in V will grow. So in fact, from what we have done so far, you understand that we will be able to solve this question by considering norms depending on time. But we have to sort of accept the fact that usual norm will blow up for our equation as time goes on.
And when you say that nonlinear stability, well, you say for all times,
Yes?
probably we say in a moment, but you meant that also in the nonlinear case you can prove some convergence to the
Yes.
homogeneous steady state.
Yes.
It's not that it just remains close, it's really...
Sorry, it's not?
It's not that it just remains close, it's that it converges.
There is a convergence for all time, a weak convergence for all time of the whole distribution. It's weak convergence, be careful.
So
It's local in space.
No, it's global.
It's global weakly, but if you want a stronger convergence, you might get it strong but local in space.
You mean by taking an average in V, for instance?
Not
I'm thinking take
No, okay, I
a
see.
region of space and just look at what
Probably I see what you think. You're thinking to dispersive estimate, but this is not happening like this in the torus. It's really, you cannot say local in space.
you're in the torus.
We don't have anything like a dispersion going to 0 locally.
Oh, sorry.
So, but the analog of what you proved before in the linear case, that the density converge to the...
This will also be true. Yeah, sorry. We have weak convergence of the whole distribution in all variables and the strong convergence of the density to its average and the force field to 0.
And you will get strong convergence of in derivative of the density itself also.
Yeah, the density will converge strongly in any HK space. It will be...
Then you oscillation in X with oscillation in V.
Yes, exactly. Remember, the intuitive idea is that I had. Did I show you this kind of picture? Filamentation means in the phase space, more or less, that you see more or less more and more oscillation of this form, with different values getting closer and closer. And the idea is that this is transversal to both coordinates. If ever you average in V, you get rid of the oscillation and you get strong convergence. If you average in X, it's also true. Both averaging in both variables, both destroy the weak convergence to give you strong convergence. The part which will be destroyed as compared to the study we have done so far is the homoclinic aspect, because the equation will be much more rich in terms of dynamics, and you cannot know what will be the limits at plus and minus infinity just by looking an average of the initial data. This is what will be new in a sense, and there's a lot to study from the theorem we have done in terms of the scattering function, understand what is the limit in terms of the initial data. So okay, I was here, and so this heuristic argument tells you more or less what, if this has size epsilon, you get an epsilon here, and the time after which Bacchus say you have, I don't believe to any nonlinear stability, is 1 over epsilon. Okay, it takes let's say the best situation k equals 1, modulus of k equals 1, and it say after a time of order 1 over epsilon, this is not small anymore. This is a heuristic, but it really is telling you that oscillation destroy the smallness of your quadratic term as time goes on. And last point, let's say numerics. It's related to debate among physicists, but also among mathematicians, of course. Well, numerics, so far, as I know, there are many interesting numerical computations, but it is, as a general thing, one can say that it's really hard to get conclusion from numerics for this, because it takes a very long time before you can be sure you are really observing a damping for the nonlinear equation and not for the linearized equation. Everybody is convinced that what I've shown you before is true for the linearized equation. But if you really want to check the damping for this equation, it takes a huge time before you're sure that you're seeing nonlinear effect. And for this huge time, of course, all the small errors are accumulating in your scheme and so on. So you can imagine the huge, probably challenging problem in numerical simulation it is. So then it has not closed the debate, I mean the numerics, that's all I can say. So now let me explain more with a more mathematical mind what are, according to me, the difficulties and the answer we gave. There could be no answers. There could be so different answers. I don't claim that it's the only way to do. So some answers you know already. First, the first main difficulty is that you want to observe a dissipative mechanism for a reversible equation. This, in fact, now you know probably the answer we give is very simple, is that there is no contradiction as long as it is a weak convergence mathematically. In other words, there is no contradiction, with more physical word, no contradiction with observable convergence. Reversibility is not contradictory with convergence of some observable. By observable, I mean some average of your system. Partial average. In an observable, you don't keep all the information of your system, you destroy a part of the information. So to give you a...
Excuse me.
Sure.
I didn't get it. Spade mechanism for what?
Sorry? Sorry, Ted?
You have there a dissipative mechanism for a reversible.
Sorry, for a reversible equation, which looks, I mean, this looks contradictory. You see why? You want to observe a convergence asymptotically to something, but your equation is reversible. Okay, I will make a picture. It will be. We can say it with words from physics or maths, but in the end, it's more or less the same.
In fact, you have the same property for free transport.
Yes, exactly. Free transport, I made this example to convince you that it's no problem. But still, I can tell you free transport in some talks and discussions is not enough to convince, depending on the audience, that it's no problem. Let me just say the following. If you have an evolution of a system with many variables, if you take some average of your system, it can converge with no contradiction. This can have an irreversible dynamics. Let me give you the most stupid example you can imagine. U of t and x equals this unitary reversible semigroup. This is the solution of dtu. This is even simpler than free transport.
It's a group.
Yeah, it's a group. Sorry, it's a group because you can go backward.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. So it solved this stupid equation, and of course, you know that if you take the integral against a test function, it goes to 0 if you have some regularity by the Riemann-Lebesgue theorem. And if you put a lot of regularity in this function initially and the test function, which means you go to weaker and weaker convergence, you get a rate which can be exponential if you go to an ATC. This example is very simple, but in a way it's not so unrelated to what we do. We see we have a lot of oscillations, and when we average it, we obtain a very good rate of decay. So mathematically, there are no contradiction, but still we have to be very careful. Any stability result.
So in your language, this would be dissipation, right?
Yeah, this is a dissipation, but at the level of an observable.
It's a limit, right?
Yes, it's a limit, but still, I mean, I don't claim it's true all the time, but you could cook a Lyapunov function for each initial data. It's not a real entropy, I don't claim this, but what makes something an entropy is that you want a formula that does not depend on the shape of the initial data. But, well, it has an irreversible dynamics. Really, you see things averaging, homogenizing, and so on. What's different in our case is that we will only average on half of the phase space. Second thing to keep in mind is that stability for any stability result for a reversible PDE yields an instability result, the mirror result if you want. Yeah, mirror. I don't have another word. You do reverse time. If you know that some initial data somewhere you go to some other thing, by reversing time, you say that something close to this, they can depart to go to different initial data. That is this interesting remark. We learned it in the paper of Cagliotti and Maffei. They made this remark very precise in their paper. 98, sorry. In GSP. And they say very correctly that if ever you can prove a weak convergence on the solution of the Basel-Poisson under some very strong perturbative condition, it means if you revert it that you can prove an instability result in very strong convergence for perturbation in weak topology. You get, this is what I call mirror result. and this is obviously not contradictory with anything. So, what I just want to emphasize, this is a bit abstract, this remark, but I just want to emphasize that if your stability is weak convergence for strong, very strong perturbation, by strong I mean you perturbate in a very strong topology, the mirror result is strong convergence for perturbating in very weak topology. And this, you know, is not contradictory with anything. It's happening very often that if you don't have good control on your initial data in the same strong topology, there will be no stability. So I just want to emphasize that there is no contradiction. And this, in more physical words, you find a nice discussion about this in the paper of Lynden-Bell, which first proposed the Landau damping phenomenon to hold for galaxies. And it says something like, even if the galactic system has reached an equilibrium distribution in space, in the X variable, it still stores the whole history of your galaxy in the particular velocities of the stars. You see, which is exactly the same idea. If you just look space, you don't see, you hide a lot of information, but your system is still reversible, but all the information is stored in the velocities. Okay, so let's say it is okay for this mechanism, and now, just to relate this mechanism with something more usual in mass, and it will relate to what you say also, Walter, about dispersion. This is not dispersion, but dispersion is the other big, let's say, irreversible phenomenon you can see on the reversible PD. Dispersion, typically, you take wave equation or Schrödinger equation in the whole space, and it will go to zero. Or you can perturb, we can add terms, but let's say
Some norms.
Yes, in some norms. Yeah, you have to specify some norms, but let's say in some norms, it will go to zero, and you will have even stronger thing, like what you were saying. You will have local. If you localize things, it will go to zero also. This is really the idea of dispersion. Dispersion of the wave packets and dispersion of the particles. This is also an irreversible mechanism, but here it's really different. The viewpoint, as I see it, in my intuition, it seems not to be ever called like this, so I don't know why, but to me, what we really want to prove is a dual phenomenon of this one. Here, we want to prove a dispersion, because more or less dispersion is about flee of the mass to infinity. We want to prove dispersion in frequencies. And to be more precise, in the frequencies of the velocity. That's where the energy is fleeing away in our system. It's confined in X and no flee of energy in the X frequencies, but the energy flees in the V velocity frequencies. So that's what would be, to my intuition, the comparison with the dispersive mechanism. Okay, so second difficulty. I will try to go up to the statement. Second difficulty is to try to get something from a linearized argument. What I mean is the following. When you linearize around something, you want typical ID, is an ID from ODE. You want to close in some norm. You want to close an inequality of the following form. But I'm writing really elementary things. But you see my point. Y is the norm at time t of my solution, and you want to close something like this. This is coming from the nonlinearity of your equation, and this is coming from the dissipativity of your equation that at some point you have to quantify in your norm. And if y is small enough initially, it will be trapped and goes to 0. This is the typical ODE kind of argument on the norm. Here we don't have this anymore, of course, so it's not clear at all that any linearized study will help. So the answer we give to this is to drop classical fixed point iteration. Because in the end of the day, all the dissipative, for the dissipative equation, all the main theorems, at some point or another, they rely on a fixed point argument, a fixed point scheme to make the object exist and so on. So we will not use this anymore, and we turn to a Newton scheme. An abstract Newton scheme. So Newton scheme means exactly what you know from numerical analysis. You solve step by step using the linearized problem, taking the error of the previous step as a source step. The big advantage of a Newton scheme is that you can start to run the scheme without knowing where you're going to. Okay, so you don't need to know in advance around which you want to do the fixed point. Of course, this idea is not new. This idea goes back at least. So I was told somebody before, like Siegel, but I have not found the reference so far. This idea goes back at least to Kolmogorov in a very famous short note in '54, where he proved what is now called Kamm theorem. And this idea was also used later on by Moser to give, relying on Nash regularization methods, to give another proof and better in lower regularity of the so-called Kamm theorem. And the A in between is for Arnold, who gave another proof, which I don't know in fact. I mean, I've seen a simplified version on the circle, but I'm much less comfortable with this proof. But so it's for Kolmogorov, Arnold, Moser.
Clément,
Yes.
Sacha est parti. Si tu oublies un russe, ce n'est pas grave.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah, but okay. Here it would be really unfair to forget one of these three guys. Maybe let me explain to you what is Kamm. Just a few words. What we will do is not Kamm, KM, but it's really important because, in fact, KIM was for us. That was really the key source of inspiration. This theorem, and the way it is proved. So it was really a key source of inspiration in our work. Unfortunately, again, we lost an enormous amount of time. I spent weeks and weeks to kill my brain on the book of Alinac-Gérard to understand the Nash-Moser theory. But in the end, we were not able to use the Nash-Moser theory, and we had to devise a method which we thought was just a simplification of this theory, going to analytic space and loss of analytic regularity, which in fact we discovered later on that it was exactly the original idea of Kolmogorov. So our proof will be, the scheme we will run will be closer to the Kolmogorov original idea of the scheme of Kamm. Now let me say a word of what is Kamm. Kamm was really a kind of revolution in dynamical systems. So applicability is really small, but you will see theoretically it has enormous consequences. Kamm theorems tell you the following. So it's a finite dimensional system. We are talking about ODEs. Consider a completely integrable system. So if you don't know exactly what it is, just think it's a kind of product of oscillators. So you exactly know what will be the trajectories for all time. It's really like this. So it's called invariant tori, but it's a product of oscillators, if you correctly rename and change the variables. Then, Kamm theorem tells you that if you make a smooth perturbation of a completely integrable system, then trajectories will still remain trapped, like oscillating in the same kind of tori for all time. And really, the key words to retain in this sentence is all time. I mean, this is what really is completely beautiful in this theory. You perturbate a reversible system by something, and for no reason it will stay stable for all time. And the main application is, of course, the solar system, because you know that the three-body problem, you don't know how to do anything. But if you forget the mass of all the planets except the sun, it can be solved. I mean, it's completely integrable. You can predict whatever, all the trajectories. So if you consider our solar system as a perturbation of a system forgetting the mass of the planets and the self-interactions between the planets, you can say it's a small perturbation of this, then Kamm theorem more or less convince you that it should be stable. So theoretically, it has extreme importance. Of course, the size of the perturbation is extremely small in the theorem, so it's not clear that you can apply it in physical situations. But you have something for free by perturbating a reversible system for all time. That's really what should be retained. And that's what we will try to prove on this nonlinear equation, that what will play the role of the completely integrable system for us will be the linearized laws of Poisson. What play the role of these oscillators that we control very well is the decoupling over all the space frequencies and the fact that we are able to solve each space frequencies for the density. And we will have a very smooth perturbation as well. And we will use a key ingredient in the proof by Kolmogorov, which is a Newton scheme in analytic spaces. So that is for the second difficulty. Is it okay if I still go for 5 minutes? Okay. However, I have to say, take really this as an intuition help. What we will prove is not Kamm theorem. There are many important differences. For instance, something I have not written here is that Kamm theorem tells you that you still have very good trajectories, but almost everywhere in the sense, up to removing a small part of your phase space. So there is a bad part in your phase space where you have some horrible thing, people are studying a lot, and you don't know really how to predict the trajectories. So you have this in the Kamm, which we will be able to completely remove for the laws of Poisson system. Okay, and a way to say for those of you who know this is that you have problem with resonances in Kamm, and resonances in our system will be zero measured, and we won't see them because we have regular solution. We won't see any problem of resonances for our very regular analytic solutions. The third difficulty is, we spoke about it already, is about the contradiction between looking at extremely regular solution and the filamentation phenomena, or more mathematically, the oscillation phenomena. Okay, so we have discussed this at length already. This is related to the objections of Bacchus. The answer we give here is something we call gliding analytic regularity, but you could do gliding Sobolev regularity if you want. And the corresponding gliding norms. So the idea here is the following. If you have a norm for f, so it's just functional here what I write. Take a function of x and v, you have some norm. Okay, I don't want to know what the norm is, let's call it some y norm. And then you will add a time shift exponent, time shift index, by defining the following way. You just shift the argument inside the norm along the free transport semigroup. And here on the right you have your initial norm you started with. You see, it's a kind of abstract guide to what we are doing. Take any norm, it could be Sobolev analytic and so on. Then we define a shifted tau norm by simply pushing forward the norm along the free transport semigroup. A key remark is that if you would take as a norm the Lebesgue norm as considered in the orbital stability theories, you don't see anything. It has no effect because the norm of translation invariance. For this to really be interesting, you need to have regular norms. So this is what we call gliding norm. The norm we use will follow the free transport semigroup. Another way to say the same is to use words from the scattering theory. So, in the end of the day, if we look at the equation and say which term should be here and which term should disappear, it is very natural to say the following. If we believe in the damping, this term should be killed in the end. If we believe in the damping, this should go to 0. So if this goes to 0, it means the equation scatters towards the free transport equation. I use this word in the same way as people say, for instance, if you take a wave equation with some nonlinearity with good conditions, then the nonlinearity is wiped out for t being very large, and you recover the dynamic of your initial wave equation. So it's a bit the same. But, so it's really, you can call this a scattering phenomena, meaning that here your semigroup, let's say ST, will be in the end, but for very large time, you expect that the semigroup, the dynamics will look like this one, but of course you have accumulated some differences with this one a long time. So what you can expect is something like saying, let's write it like this. I go backward the transport semigroup, forward my nonlinear semigroup, and I want this to stay bounded. This is a scattering viewpoint for all time. I want to say the two dynamics never go apart for too large. But, so now, if you look at this, the problem is that this equation has oscillations. You can do nothing against. And these oscillations mean the blow up of the norm. So then you could do two things. The most natural by far would be to say, well, it's not a big deal. We just need to consider a new unknown function by taking f along the free transport trajectories. And then we would have that dt of g would be this free transport operator of f at the translated point. And then we could try to rewrite a new equation for G. Which would be, hopefully, just equivalent and much, much simpler than modifying all our norms. Unfortunately, for the real problem we have to deal with, the force is not compatible with doing this. The force is defined as a convolution with rho of f, remember, and rho of f is the average over velocity. And this you cannot express as a function of g. Of g only. What I mean by this is kind of heuristic. I mean you cannot just express as a function of g without going back to the original variable. In other words, you cannot close an equation on your new unknown function g. Which is the reason for which in the proof we always have to go to do something like Eulerian viewpoint. Sometimes we have to be Lagrangian, meaning we have to look really what are the characteristics. And we have to keep at the same time under control rho, f, and in my notation here, g, but also much more complicated things like g composed with this finite time scattering functions. Sorry, f composed with this omega t. So this, I hope it gives at least some ideas of the problem we want to deal with. And now let me get the statement and end up with this. So maybe 3. Okay, so consider a stationary solution homogeneous, analytic, with the Penrose stability condition. Assume that W is an interaction potential which is regular enough in the following sense. Its Fourier transform decays at least like 1 over k squared for non-zero k, of course. I don't want to disblow it. And this includes Coulomb and Newton in dimension 3. Then, so this is the short, if you want, statement. Then you have nonlinear stability and nonlinear damping in an analytic neighborhood of F0. So this is the short statement, and in the blackboard below, let me write the full details. And by stability, I mean for all time and so on. So more precisely, I assume F0 to have the following analytic controls. So a control in Fourier form with something I call lambda 0. A control in entire series form so it's another way to define analyticity by just summing the iterated derivatives in L1 of V. So you want these two quantities to be finite. Second thing, we want, so I will not write it again, okay? It will take half the blackboard, so you have the Penrose stability criterion. Then third point, initial perturbation F initial. You want to say it's a perturbation in analytic sense, so we will assume the following. We'll assume that for all mods, we have this estimate. It's k, sorry. I will comment just a few words about the assumption, and we want also to have localization in V control. Meaning an exponential tail in L1 sense. And here epsilon will be something small. Then, I will take another blackboard for the then. So, then for epsilon small enough, well, this guy is explicit from all the previous constants and so on. We have that the force field F of t is let me write it like this. Any Sobolev space, for instance, in fact you have more, you have some control improving with the frequencies, but it will be shorter to write it like this. It's going to 0 with such a control. Lambda prime, as always, you have lost a bit. And the force, the full distribution is weakly converging towards something called F plus infinity, depending only on V. And for time going backward, it's weakly converging to something we call F minus infinity. Okay, and the force field, you could look at the convergence in both sense. If both sense goes to 0. So that's the strong convergence, the weak one. And as I was saying, you can also average over space. And you have a strong convergence towards the same limits. This is the space average. Okay, so let me end up with this. Yes, everything is with exponential rate. Also here, I mean, before you, well, written like this, it's hard to know what means an exponential rate. In fact, you know now what it means. Maybe it's still written somewhere. In the sense of always this control at each frequencies. Always the same control of the free transport. It's always the same. So here it means same control, remember, as for free transport. Here it means same control as the consequence of this control for the velocity average. Okay, and this is slightly different here. The rate is also exponential, but that's a bit more intricate. You have to look the equation with the QML and so on. And let me say I wanted to say something. Yeah, that's about the maximum thing you can assume. You have exponential localization in space frequencies, velocity frequencies, and velocity. And space, you're in the torus. You don't have anything to control with, to control at infinity. The result is global. And in fact, it's a natural question to know whether this could be different. And we proved they can be different in the end of the paper, in one of the last sections. So we really proved that we have a whole set of heteroclinic orbit, which is theoretically interesting, even if there's flaws, we make an expansion and so on, because it shows that, as I was saying, the structure of the linear as case is broken. So it's really, indeed, much richer. And in particular, since they have the same Casimir functional and so on, nothing is changed by reversing time. Energy, Casimir functional. It tells you in particular that they cannot be predicted just by the invariant of the equations. What will be the limit? You cannot predict just by statistical argument with the invariant. Yes, okay. Maybe I'll stop here. I'm already late.